Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Aliens and Angels podcast. Today, I'm very happy to bring on a new friend, Artemaeus Treadwell. And for those of you not yet familiar with Artemaeus, let me tell you a little bit about him. Artemaeus Treadwell is an American experiencer. After meeting paranormal intermediary Tilly, his life took thousands of unforeseen, unforgettable turns, from witnessing Tilly's psychic abilities to bumping into a fairy, meeting mimics, dark entities, maybe an Egyptian god or two, seeing UFOs and strange planetary behavior, and more. At home, extreme electrical events, strange scientific anomalies, apports, and disappearing objects. Time glitches and the Mandela effect are positively common events. Bizarrely, his foray into the deep paranormal has transformed his personality, beliefs, and understanding of psychology, reality, and life in measures and ways no short of miraculous. He believes that the unknown holds many gifts if only we can learn to embrace them, and the unique messengers who carry them. Artemaeus and Tilly have proudly made featured guest and partner status with the 2025 Full Disclosure Now conference, and they are in consideration for speaking at the 2026 event. I want to thank you all for joining us and for liking, commenting, subscribing, and please do share my content with your friends. You'll find all of the links below in the description box. And I'm happy to announce that you can now become a member of my YouTube channel and receive perks and help me to support the channel. So without further ado, I'll bring on our friend Artemaeus. Hi, Artemaeus. How you doing?
I am doing all right. How about you, Karen?
I'm really good. This is actually take two because it didn't start streaming right away. So I feel funny saying the same thing over. But anyway, it's all good. Yeah, it's good. I'm so happy to have you on the show. We've been texting back and forth. We've been sharing videos, and I just thought that your experience would be really relative to the Aliens and Angels podcast. So I'm very thrilled that you could be here today. So I thought a good place for us to start off might be what your life was like before you met Tilly and how that changed, and from what I understand, fairly dramatically, and how everything shifted after you met Tilly. So I thought it would be good to start off before you met Tilly. What was your life like?
Yes, perfect. Actually, great place to start. So, my first 26, 7, 8 years or so before Tilly was pretty. I would have to say closed-minded. So, if we want to start, maybe even from childhood, I grew up with parents who had me quite by accident when they were very young, and they did the absolute best that they could. My father went into the military, the Marines, so one of the tougher branches of action. And as such, I sort of grew up in a little bit of, I guess, an emotional deficit. So, therapeutically, for anybody who is familiar with that sort of background, if you have two emotionally unavailable or emotionally immature parents, the child will make their own way in the world. And there are different ways that you can go about that. But for me, the particular outcome of that was that I developed a lot of more selfish and self preserving tendencies. which is not uncommon for humans and this planet on this plane. It does tend to be geared more towards survival. And so that was the avenue that this particular ego, this avatar that I have, took, and was pretty convinced all throughout, my teenage years and into my young adult years that I knew what I was doing and I was pretty darn smart. And I went into the science fields. I went graduated from the Ohio State University. I did human psychology, animal behavior, and human anatomy, essentially, and thought that I had a pretty good understanding of things, and that if it couldn't be explained by the typical academic, average scientific community, then it probably wasn't a thing. It was something that was, made up. It was woo woo. It was, whatever. Until until I met Tilly, and that whole mentality, the whole lens through which I looked at the world was very abruptly confronted with things that I could not explain. And furthermore, something that I had always apparently needed and wanted from childhood, which was essentially what I now have come to understand is the most pure form of love, which Tilly embodies. And I don't just say that because I married her. I should, because she's my wife. I genuinely mean that. And through the paranormal experiences from that, being exposed to things that I couldn't explain, being forced to confront the fact that I didn't know everything and that there was a lot more out there, and also being shepherded essentially by somebody who said, I know you, who you are deep down. I love you. And, we can do this together, essentially, was a powerful combination that I I wish that more people could experience that sort of love and trust and awakening, I guess, in a way that was, oh, beyond words, really. I don't really have words for it, which I suppose maybe a lot of people would say their awakening was beyond words, honestly. But well, yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, I can start with the story of when the very first time that we met in person, if you'd like, which sort of you know cracked open my understanding of what was possible.
Sure, sure, go for it.
Yeah, so we had been so our people of our generation and younger, the typical way to go about meeting is through online dating. So we met on through an online dating website, and we were sending messages back and forth. It was going pretty well. And so when we decided to meet in person the very first time, I arrive and she comes bouncing out of her apartment, just this happy, bubbly little, ball of energy. And now that I look back on it, I realize that Tilly serves as a mirror to people. So I'll give a little bit of background. Tilly is part of the neurodivergent group of people, which you may have heard called autistic. There's a pretty big spectrum for that. So somewhere in that she falls. And so, when people meet her, and I've seen this demonstrated over the last 9 years that I've been with her, it tends to be a reflection. She serves as a reflection of whatever that person has going on, in their inner world. So I've seen extreme responses on either end of the spectrum. And I realized looking back on it now that when I saw her for the very first time, it's embarrassing to admit, but I will, because humility is key to to change. I thought, ugh, nobody can be that happy. And I just felt so, irritated by how happy she was. And I laugh about it now because if I don't, I'll feel so much like a jerk. But, because I was very much so. And as a consequence of growing up the way that I did. And so I still, she gets in the car, we go on the date. It's a little rough at first because I'm being pretty closed off and guarded because I think, she's an airhead. This is not somebody I can really relate to, moving on, even though we had great conversation prior to, meeting in person. But she luckily, bless her, was patient with me, or naive to the fact that I was being such a jerk. But we went throughout the date. We get towards the evening, and the conversation finally unfolds a little bit, more organically, and we're finally having a decent time. We end up at a local mall, and we were having such a good time talking that we actually got locked in the mall because they had closed, and security, for whatever reason, didn't know that we were there until we went to go leave. So we go to leave. I'm getting ready to take her back. We're in the car, and she decides, after these several hours of talking, that she's going to drop a bomb on me, which is that she was able to articulate to me what I can only describe as a deep soul knowing. So, from what I understand, here we have these egos. I'll call them egos. It's this character, this avatar that we have while we're here on this planet, in this dimension, in this plane, to go about having the experience that we do while we're here, enjoying the stories of our lives, essentially. And underneath that is what I would call that soul essence, that soul spark. And she was able to articulate that about me in a way that nobody could have possibly known, because I had never written it down, even, much less told another soul about it. And at that particular moment, and it was, a relaying of, I know this about you, I love this about you, we go back a long ways, you maybe don't know that right now, but I see it, and I love it. I love you, basically. And anytime anybody had ever said, I love you, I guess maybe in my family, you have a certain understanding of what that is, what people think love is, average. But this went so much deeper. And at that moment, the distrust that I had for anybody and everybody, the manipulation that I experienced, the emotional unavailability, I mean, all of it was gone with that sort of I see you, that sort of intimacy. I've heard other speakers call it into me see, which I think so many people are looking for in their lives genuinely. And the ego is the thing that kind of gets in the way of that. We can talk more about that later. But, Tilly has had many psychics tell her that she is just this pure light, this crystal light, this pure love, basically, which over these 9 years or so I've come to understand really what I think love on a healthy level may be, versus the way that humans tend to throw it around. And
Mm-hmm.
um so she tells me this, and I just kind of feel this flood of maybe past life feelings, this immediate soul connection, whatever it was. And it was, I mean, rock solid. And again, that kind of cracked me open to, I think, pave the way for more of these paranormal experiences, because I think if I hadn't had that trust, that bridge built at first, which is what people genuinely need, usually, they need to build that trust and that rapport first before you go, okay, here's the rest of the crazy we're going to expose to you. And so all subsequent paranormal experiences after that, I was more able to um, tolerate, I guess, maybe believe, or at least be open to them. And to further validate that soul connection, that description that she gave me, this is something else that Tilly usually does. She gives some sort of, validating piece of information that is grounded in, this reality's experience. So she went further to say that there was this being who was there, who was speaking with her, presenting itself as a Native American chieftain. And she described this Native American chieftain, and I knew exactly who she was talking about as she's describing, and saying that this individual was here to help facilitate the relationship, because we have a soul contract. We have things that, we came here particularly to help with, to do. And then he was providing guidance in that way. And I realized, as she's describing the being, that my father was a collector of Native American paraphernalia, even though he wasn't Native American himself in any way, from what I understand. He was just very drawn to it, maybe a past life thing, I'm not really sure. But we had been gifted a portrait of a Native American chieftain who, again, precisely as she described, and this portrait hung on the wall directly outside of my bedroom, as a teenager growing up in my parents' place. And so she had never been there at all to have seen any of this. And again, remember, she's telling me all this the very first night we actually met in person. So on top of this, casually reaching into my soul and being like, oh, yeah, here you go. Here's some information for you that nobody else could possibly know. By the way, it's true. And I can validate that by describing the portrait of this, maybe spirit guide who's been kind of with you, or at minimum, we could say mimicking the form of this individual who was very much literally watching over me every day. Coming and going from my bedroom, this person was literally watching every day. So it was a little bit of goosebumps from that. So anyway, yeah, that was kind of like a 1-2 punch that night that sort of solidified things for me. So
Wow. Wow. That's very, very interesting. And I'm quite impressed that you were open-minded, being of a science sort of background, that you were open, but I guess she was giving you evidence that she couldn't argue with. And so
yeah,
that started the ball rolling.
yeah,
And in your life with Tilly, I understand you've had all kinds of experience from apports showing up, um, and you've had electrical disturbances. And it just shows, in my opinion, how connected we are to the physical 3D, even though, depending on how you look at it, it's the world of illusion, but how we do have direct control and interactions with electricity and ports. And for those that don't know what ports are, they are things that just appear that aren't there and then they're there. I've had that experience a few times, and I always think that it's somehow shifting timelines where it's here in this timeline and it's not there in another. Or I look for something and I look everywhere for it, and I look in the same spot 4 times, it's not there. And then it is there. It's very spooky, very weird. Do you want to talk about some of these interesting experiences you've had uh, that you and Tilly have shared since you've been together?
yeah, of course. Yeah. So if you want to speak directly to apports or things appearing or disappearing and reappearing, that was actually one of the first undeniable paranormal experiences that I had. So things were quiet for a little while for the first, I'd say, year and a half or so after that, initial meeting that we had and we were together. And things really started to ramp up once we moved to Florida, which for anybody who is familiar with paranormal activity, Florida, I guess it's one of those hotbeds for it. The land itself might just have a particular vibration that's just very friendly to that sort of occurrence. So we had moved to Florida and I had misplaced my phone. Pretty typical, wallet, keys, phone, always one of those three I'm losing. And so on this day, phone's missing and we're looking. I employ her to help me to look. We start in the bedroom where I'm pretty sure I had left it last, pulling all of the, sheets off the blanket or sheets off the bed and, underneath the bed, in the drawers, checking all the places. Okay, under pillows, definitely, feeling all over the bed. All right, it's not here anywhere. Let's try another room. Multiple rooms. We repeat this process, and now I'm getting desperate. I'm looking in the fridge. I'm looking outside, underneath doormats, like in really weird places because we just cannot find my phone. And neither do I have at that point, for whatever reason, the ability to call it and, actually hear it. I think it was on silent. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to go back to square one where I thought I left it back in the bedroom. The bed has been torn apart, obviously, but what had not been torn apart was the fitted sheet on the bed. And so I go and once again, I'm run my hand across the entire bed and I hit something on my side of the bed that's curiously phone shaped. And I'm like, no, come on, pull up the fitted sheet. Now, mind you, we did not like make the bed, remake the bed, none of that. And sure enough, there was my phone underneath the fitted sheet. And Tilly's not a prankster in that way at all. She likes to leave things as naturally experienced as possible because she doesn't want to create any doubt in any of these experiences. So that's one thing she doesn't play with. And I sat there staring at that phone that was underneath the fitted sheet going, there is literally no way that this could have ended up underneath the fitted sheet. We didn't take it apart. And neither did she really leave my sight at any point to throw it underneath the fitted sheet, even if I thought for a minute that I couldn't trust her with that. So that was the first experience that I had with something that disappeared and then reappeared roughly in the same area, but in a place, in a position essentially that could not have happened for any other explanation that I have anyway, other than that it disappeared into perhaps another quantum dimension and then came back and just not quite where it was before. So
Mhm. Mhm.
that right. So and I'm, you know, open-minded at this point, but still a little bit shaken because I'm like, okay, this means what are the implications of this? This means that, things can disappear and then reappear. And okay, if that can happen, where can it happen? With what can it happen? And I think it's easy for people to become perhaps a little bit fearful of that sort of thing, especially if
Mhm.
they don't understand it. That's a pretty natural human response, is to be afraid of that which you don't understand. I've found that keeping an open mind, though, and being curious has gone a long way to creating positive paranormal experiences, albeit sometimes annoying.
Mhm.
But, there's lessons in there too. It is what you make of it, basically. And perspective is everything. So that was disappearing and reappearing item number one. And then some years later, it was probably, oh, I don't know, maybe 4 years later, roughly, there was an instance where I actually watched an item appear out of nowhere, thin air. And there was absolutely no way that it could have just, fallen from somewhere. So it was a hair tie, much like this. Tilly and I were sitting in front of the bathroom mirror, getting ready for something. And we're both, staring straight ahead. And the mirror is plain. It's just a sheet of glass. And there are no shelves above it, to the side of it. It's very, very plain, basic. And we were standing there getting ready. And roughly from, I would say, about on me, it would have been roughly maybe sternum height or so. I watched this black hair tie just drop onto the counter. And it wasn't out of the corner of my eye. It was literally dead straight ahead and didn't come from the side or above or anything like that. It was, basically here and then just dropped onto the sink. And I stared at it for a minute. One of those moments where when you see something and you don't have an explanation for it, or you're like, did I really see that? You have that moment. And I look over at Tilly and she goes, huh, I needed that. Picked it up, goes about, doing what she's doing. And I said, but you saw that, right? She goes, yeah, no big deal, just moving about her day. Like, that's totally fine. And I imagine that as an intermediary, I'm sure there are many things that she sees and hears that would probably scare the ever loving pants off of the average person who is not used to hearing or seeing any of those kinds of things. But to her, it was just another day. And I to this day maintain that there is no possible explanation for that hair tie to have ended up there other than to have literally apported, to have appeared and just
Mhm.
dropped. So,
Mhm. Awesome.
yeah, small things,
So,
but impactful.
well, yeah. Yeah, well, they're important things because those are things that, when we experience them, we tend to shrug them off as our imagination. we tend to gaslight ourselves.
Mhm.
And I think that, we should maybe start giving more credibility to our experiences. So another interesting experience you had that I thought was really that I think the audience would like to hear about is I believe I'll let you tell the story, but I believe you and Tilly had had a bit of a fight as couples do. And you went
Mhm.
off to work, and
Mhm.
somehow her emotions, I'm guessing, correct me if I'm wrong, uh, took out the electricity of the house. Is that right?
That is 100% correct. Yeah. So, I mean, even though I absolutely love Tilly and I talk about her, I gush about her and the things that she's done, for expanding my experience and improving my life, the difference that we have between the two of us, especially from the beginning, and even now still, there's a huge difference in neurodiversity there. We have our fair share of misunderstandings, and then in the beginning a lot of it was my issue, my attitude, and not being so cooperative and kind, again needing to work through a lot of my own baggage. So yeah, we had I don't even remember what the disagreement was about, but it was severe enough that, again, yeah, you're right, I left for work, and she calls me or texts me, I can't remember, to say, hey, half of the electricity in the house isn't working. So, and that may have included air conditioner or, some important component that living here in Florida, you really cannot go without. It can't wait. So I thought, okay, we were renting at the time. So I called to get maintenance out there, and maintenance arrives. And sometime after that, they call me to touch base, and they said, okay, so I needed to call my supervisor to help me fix the situation because I've never seen anything like this before, where when I went to go turn on the stove, a light across the house was activated instead. So there was not only did half of the electricity get blown out in the house, but somehow it had essentially rewired itself, and he didn't have any clue on A, how that could have possibly happened, and B, how to even go about fixing it. So he had to call a supervisor, and it took them a little bit longer to figure it out. But indeed, that had happened very shortly after Tilly had, an extreme welling of emotion, essentially, was very upset. And I may have blown that off. I mean, I thought about it and, okay, that's definitely coincidental in some ways, but, maybe there's something to that. And so the
Mhm.
next house that we ended up in, the same thing happened, this time with the air conditioner and a component within that air conditioner that was brand new when we arrived. And when the tech got there, said, this also makes no sense. It shouldn't have happened because this part is practically brand new, and it wasn't like a, something manufacturer faulty piece of equipment. It just shouldn't have failed and failed in the way that it did. So
Mhm.
that second time, and again, another argument, um, that point I realized, you know, if not for just the piece of the relationship, which we should be working towards anyway when, we're married, or it doesn't matter if we're married, any relationship at all, working towards peace and cooperation, let's not blow out half the house's electricity every time we have an argument. So it behooves me to work on some better communication skills, some better control of myself so that we don't keep having these issues. But further to that point, we did a little bit of an experiment with the electrical phenomena, and we bought one of these voltometers. So it's a piece of equipment that has two little uh, probes that electricians will use to test what the voltage is, amperage
Mhm.
is, running through a line. It's a standard piece of equipment. So we bought one and decided to just see, because all humans put out or have electrical activity, decided to see what our measurements were. So I, put my thumbs on the probes, and I had a mildly positive output of electrical signal. But consistently, we perform this regularly. consistently, Tilly has a negative reading. So I'm not an electrician. I probably would do best to look into what that actually means. But consistently, we have completely opposite readings in that way. So, for whatever that's worth, I don't know what causes that, but it is interesting.
It sure is. It sure is. Um, I'm wondering if I can take you a little bit into a different topic.
Mhm.
And I understand that you've had experience with what you call mimics and dark entities. For those in the audience, do you want to describe what is a mimic, what is a dark entity, and then talk a bit about your experience with them? Would that be okay?
Yeah, absolutely. So, from what I understand, mimics are different from shapeshifters. So, mimics are beings or entities that will take on the form of something. It could be anything, typically with some sort of goal in mind. So, if they wish to walk amongst and be seen by people, they'll take a form that's perhaps not as alarming, might look like the average human,
Mhm,
or if the goal is to alarm a human, might take on something that's grotesque or horrifying to that particular human. It all just depends on what their goal is. So they'll put on that mask, if you will,
mhm.
and present that way for that particular goal.
Would
And
those be interdimensionals, or would they be spirits, or would they be extraterrestrials?
so from what I understand, it can
Mhm,
be any and all. They anytime we're talking about a non-human person or interdimensional being, they have the ability to do that. So I think we probably are experiencing more interdimensional beings than we are alien or intergalactic. Most of what we're
mhm,
seeing here are beings that are just shifting between dimensions here on
mhm,
on this planet. So I think they a lot of them have that ability to do the mimicry should they wish. Maybe a lot of
mhm,
them don't. I don't know. um, and the dark entities, I use that term when describing, well, I mean, there's a couple different ways that you could take it. And it depends on who you're talking to. A dark entity, some people will describe as something with a negative connotation. So it will
mhm,
both, visually look dark and also have what they would describe as nefarious or malicious intent. And we can talk, and maybe would be good to talk about our judgment of the intent and of the what's good or evil, because from what I understand, non-human people don't have that sort of judgment for themselves. They
mhm,
simply perform whatever role is asked of them, either consciously or subconsciously, by the human that they're interacting with. So when I say dark entity, I generally mean something that is currently serving the role of antagonist to a human, and then also has a dark appearance. So shadow person generally would be how I mean it when I say it.
mhm, mhm. Oh, that's really interesting, because even I'm more familiar, with the ET realms, but actually all my experiences are what I consider to be transdimensional. But often, people, especially children, will have contact, say, with the grays, but they're able to create a screen image. So they're able to make it look like they're a clown, or that they're an owl, or those are very, very common. I myself had an experience when I was preschool age, where I was terrified at night, and I had a fiery griffin appear to me to protect me and tell me that I was safe. And it was a really weird experience. I did not find out till I was in my 20s that it was a griffin. I don't know exactly what it was. Like, I really don't know, because all I saw was this fiery griffin made out of flames. and I wasn't afraid of it, and it really helped me a lot. And after that, I was able to call on it just in my mind, just being afraid and saying, come and help me," and having its image in my mind, and it would come and it would help me. So I know it's very strange, but although I wouldn't classify that as being a mimic, I don't know what I would classify that as. There's so much overlap. Artemaeus, would you agree that there's a lot of overlap? And then, as you mentioned earlier, I'd love you to go a little bit more into that. Our perception of their intention may not even be their intention. Do you want to talk a little bit about the psychology of all of this?
I would love that. Yes. So I'll start with my one and only experience with a dark entity. So a lot of my paranormal
Mm.
experiences tend to happen in my twilight consciousness. So that period of not quite awake, but not quite asleep. And I'll give a little bit of background on some of that, some scientific background, if it might help anybody. It makes sense to me that for somebody like me who had a very strong ego presentation for much of my life, that one of the places where I'm actually more open to communicating with non human entities would be in that twilight state. Because what happens is this feature of the brain called the default mode network. It's that autopilot, we can call it an autopilot for most people, that sort of accumulates throughout your life. It's based on your experiences and it's there to supposedly help keep you alive. If you have some negative experiences, you avoid those things, and then positive experiences will have you doing more of those things. It's not perfect. It can often put you into a very narrow box, and therapy will help bring you back out of that and challenge some of those assertions. But that's what the default mode network is. It's meant to keep you kind of on the straight and narrow just for your survival. But when you start to go to sleep, that default mode network goes offline. Your ego essentially goes offline. And so for me, a lot of my experiences thusly happen in that twilight stage or even when I'm fully asleep. So in this particular experience that I had, I was sitting upright in bed, staring straight ahead, and off to my left, there is a small square mirror on the wall, which in reality didn't actually exist. So I'm staring straight ahead, and out of the corner of my eye, I see something move within the mirror. And immediately, the hair on the back of my neck stands up because that lizard portion of my brain that's constantly assessing the world for threats goes, okay, you're looking ahead. That mirror is over here. If there is nothing in front of that mirror and there's something moving in that mirror, something's not right. And so I'm already a bit on edge, knowing that something is amiss here. And so I look over to check this mirror out because it might be smart for me to assess the threat. And coming head first through the mirror is something very, very large and very, very dark. And immediately, I had this knee jerk response. I had no control over it. I felt the most visceral sense of terror I have ever had in my life. I've lived a good life. I've never had any truly fear God moments. But in that particular moment, all of the alarm bells in my brain went off and I felt that terror and I started screaming, which also not something that I do generally anytime I'm startled by anything. It's not my first response. But whatever this thing was, I had the distinct feeling that it had all of the control over at least my physiological and maybe emotional state, whatever this body is. It was able to smash that all nuclear threat red button alarm. And I was essentially paralyzed with fear. But what I had been able to do up to that point had been experimenting with lucid dreaming in some ways since I was really young. I didn't realize that I was. And I knew how to wake myself up. So I woke myself up from that experience, and I look over and, Tilly's sound asleep, which if you ever get a chance to talk to Tilly and I both, what's interesting is that we have completely different experiences of what happened in that moment. Me waking up versus her seeing me essentially being tortured in my sleep, flopping around, and she woke me up. But that aside, I woke her up and she tells me that, she doesn't sense anything around, that she's not terribly concerned at that point, but that she thinks she knows exactly what the problem was. And apparently, she had been speaking to a colleague of hers, I think literally just the day before, about this particular entity and what its role towards humanity generally is. And that entity didn't appreciate that sort of illumination of its activity. And as over the years, I've talked to Tilly about, my own psychology, maybe average human psychology, and then non-human person psychology. She was explaining to me that everything with non-human psychology is essentially without ego, without emotion. Everything is very tit for tat. So they will come to the table, they will agree or disagree, make an arrangement, they'll make a set of rules, they'll stick to that, and there is no deviation from that whatsoever unless both parties come back and, reassess the situation. There is never one person steps ahead of another. It's in, lockstep agreement at every point. So she said that she didn't realize that she had misstepped and that she was going to rectify it as quickly as possible. So when I left for work, she invited this entity into the home space to speak with it and to basically humble herself, apologize for the mistake, and then ask, what should be the game plan? What are the rules moving forward for code of conduct, basically? So they agreed on a set of rules, and that was that. Ever since then, I have been completely unbothered by anything even, remotely approaching that sort of experience. So, if before I move on to the mimic stories, which are a bit lighter hearted, if you want, we could, talk a little bit more about that.
Wow, that's really very, very interesting. So, so a lot of us feel um, that these dark entities have a nefarious purpose and they're just randomly targeting people. But from what I'm understanding from your experience is Tilly actually breached a protocol and then was able to come to an agreement. Do you think that it's safe for people to, if they are approached by a dark entity, to come into an agreement with them? I've never tried that. I've had a couple experiences that were dark, but that was more like nightmares.
Mhm.
And in my experience, I was always offered a place to go that was safe so that I could escape and be safe. But do you think we could actually negotiate, or what's your advice to I guess, the common person?
Right. So, from my own experience with Tilly, who is, I mean, she has a mind like a steel trap when it comes to social contracts, basically, which I admit I am miserable at remembering in some cases. So I recognize that I have, I'm, my shortcomings are far too great in that area to make what would be a truly mutual agreement with a non-human entity. So I don't even attempt. The best
Mhm.
thing that I have found for the average person in that way is to recognize that I believe the vast majority of the time, maybe if not all of the time, when people are experiencing something negative like a haunting or a poltergeist or a possession or something like that, there is something that they are not taking personally they're not taking personal responsibility for, that is essentially feeding that entity, and they are subconsciously inviting that entity to attach themselves and feed off of that energy in that way. Tilly has told me stories about her and her experiences doing exorcisms with the Catholic Church, where in every single situation where they were called out, there was some combination of, if not all, present details of domestic violence, alcoholism, or substance abuse.
Mhm.
Yeah, pick any one of those things, or just straight up not having integrity, breaking promises, and um, avoiding responsibility. We'll just put it that way. So,
Mhm.
at one of the best ways to prevent that sort of activity is to really do your inner work. Go to therapy, do what Jung would call your shadow work. Get to know yourself, accept yourself, humble yourself towards your shortcomings, work on, your weaknesses, lean into your strengths in that way, and really just try to live a mindful existence. It's As human beings, I don't think that's something that we do perfectly. That's not the point of being here. It's just
Mhm.
doing your best in that way. And for me, anyway, doing that, cleaning myself up in that way, I live a pretty boring, you could say, experience with those sorts of negative, paranormal experiences. I'm fine with that, by the way. I'm not looking for
Yeah,
that kind
me
of smoke
too.
in my drama. But I also recognize that perhaps a lot of the paranormal experiences that I have at ports, or I don't know, I have had beings speak to me in my dreams. They're very even keeled, very calm, very pleasant. There's nothing, excitatory really about them. And that's
Mhm.
probably the best that I can expect, because I certainly don't think that I can overcome enough of my ego and the shortcomings in maintaining promises to be able to hold agreements with non-human entities. So I'm not saying don't attempt, because maybe there are intermediaries or neurodivergent people out there like Tilly listening who can hold those sorts of agreements and hold them without fail.
Mhm.
I know that for people like me, it's not going to be a thing. So, being humble and doing your best to do that inner work, know yourself from the inside out, and
Mhm.
that will go a very long way to preventing those sorts of things. And that's not to say that maybe there are experiences like the grays that people talk about, where people really are unfortunately being abducted and experimented on, tortured for whatever reason. I think that does suck. However,
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
majority of other paranormal experiences are not that way. So,
Mhm. Mhm. I would agree with you 100%. And some of those abduction experiences may even be partly human initiated, because often the people with the negative experiences are taken to underground labs. They see people in military uniforms, humans in military uniforms. Unfortunately, really, I wish there was more factual information out there, because it's very confusing. Even for myself as an experiencer, I find it very, very confusing. So, I can't believe how fast our time is going by. Before we continue, I just want to say a quick shout out to Denise and Leah and Van Darkholm. Thank you guys for joining us in the live chat today. Um, what I'd like to do is give you a few minutes, Artemaeus, to talk about something we haven't touched on yet, something that you feel is important that you want to share with my audience. I think that would be really a good place to go next.
ooh, yeah. I mean, we haven't quite gotten to the mimics portion that you had asked. We got the dark
Oh,
entity
right,
story,
right.
actually. So I think
Sure.
we could probably go there. And while I'm not sure that that is perhaps the most paramount or important, I still think that it is good to talk about. Um, so, so after that negative, what I would consider to be a negative dark entity experience, after that, or rather around that time, I did have two, actually, and they were a couple of years apart. So the first one, and this kind of, my mimics are actually mimics that are taking the form of Tilly when they interact with me. And I think that's because they're, as much as I say I would like to interact with a non-human entity that has a presentation that is not human, I probably still would, on a lizard brain level, be terrified if I actually saw it in person. So these mimics take the form of Tilly, and again, also in my twilight sort of brainwave states. So this first experience, it scared me a little bit, but Tilly was able to reassure me later. I was laying in bed, falling asleep, and I remember vaguely, being awake and looking over at Tilly, and I saw her reach over with her hand and just kind of, lightly put it over my face, and she just said, "Go back to sleep." And immediately I knew that that was not her, because the opposite is usually true. When Tilly is awake, she is trying to get my attention and, interact with me. She's a bit like a, little monkey sometimes with that energy, and I'm the opposite in those ways. So when she also, she doesn't give orders at all. She wouldn't say go back to sleep. She would ask me questions and be curious. So all of those things combined, I knew it wasn't her, and I immediately start to try to fight it. And if anybody's ever felt G-force from, being in a roller coaster or a fast car or, whatever, you'll feel that, intense weight keeping you, back in your seat, or in this case, against the bed. I go to try to get up, and I feel like I weigh 10,000 pounds, like the weight of a dying star, basically. And, my face, I feel like my skin is just peeling back, and I'm struggling so hard just to get up because I'm fighting it, like that toddler that doesn't want to go to sleep. No, I'm not, I'm not going down. I'm not going down without a fight. I'm very stubborn in that way. And so her hand is still there, and I'm still struggling. And after several, what felt like several seconds, it might not have been that long. Eventually, it kind of breaks, and I'm able to get up, like the weight is no longer there. And once again, as I completely come to, I look over, and Tilly is sound asleep. So I'm a little disturbed at this point, because I feel like something just tried to knock me out, and I don't know why. So
Mhm.
I wake her up, and, she wakes up and she goes, "Mm, no, I don't. I mean, I don't really see anything. I'm not hearing anything. It's probably okay. Something taking on, my form. I don't think that was anything nefarious." And so, okay, she's the authority. I, you know, acquiesce. I defer to her in this realm, because obviously I don't know what I'm doing. So I go back to sleep, and no big deal. A few years pass, and this next instance happens right around or on my 35th birthday. So in this case, Tilly, this mimic, takes the form of Tilly. I don't know that it's not Tilly at this point. I'm in this twilight state again, and Tilly and I are wrestling around in bed, and it has this little bit of, playful, if you know what I mean, edge to it. And I'm okay, all right, I can get behind this. This is a good way to start the morning. And she pins me, and okay, that's unusual. Not usually something that she does, but I think I can go with this. Typically, she'll pin me, and then I'll, roll over and let her win for a minute, and then okay, it's fine. Like, that's just part of the game, right? I go to get up though, and I realize that she has me pinned very well, like to the point where I can't get up. And shortly after I have this revelation, I don't have much time to think about it. Once again, very embarrassing moment here that I'm going to admit, just for humility's sake and to share the story. I feel pressure between my lower cheeks. And I go, "Oh, no, 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 no. We don't do this. This is not an activity that we have ever discussed. Neither is it something that we've ever said we enjoy. I'm out. This is not Tilly." And I do my thing in the lucid dreaming. I realize that this isn't reality, whatever reality is. And I wake up once again, Tilly asleep next to me. So,
Uh-huh.
okay, all right. So here we are again. Tilly, hey, wake up. I something just violated me. And I'm saying this, and as it's coming out of my mouth, I'm going, this is so embarrassing. I can't believe I'm gonna be that guy who, who had that alien probe experience, but the alien was my wife. Like, this is crazy. So I wake her up. She goes, you know what? Actually, now I know, I think I know what this is about. She said, now that we've been working, more closely with one another on, the YouTube channel that we have now, since I've done a lot of my inner work, and I think I have managed to mature to a point where I can actually be, helpful and cooperative in that way. I have, she said at that point, the people that she's associated with on the other side thought that it might be worthwhile to essentially give me a health check. And that's what she said it was. She kind of laughed when she said it. She's like, "You're about that age now." Not something I ever want to hear, but you're about that age now where things are starting to need a little bit of maintenance, which is absolutely true. Unfortunately, I've experienced that in sufferingly real detail recently. And she said they were just checking up on you, and they know that, you're kind of a fighter still in that way, and you probably would not sit for anything like that. So they decided to take on, my form to at least, get a little bit of that exam in before you noped out of that situation. So I was like, but can they just, like, maybe they just be honest with me, and really, is that the
Yeah.
only way that they can do it, and she's like, well, unfortunately, if that lizard brain, that human ego, that portion, if you really do not have good control over that, which I have to be humble and say I still don't, that I would be too difficult to approach in that way, and probably would be absolutely terrified. And that's, they don't want that. So she sort of laughed it off, and then, "Are you okay? It's gonna be okay," kind of thing, no big deal. And yeah, so those have been my experiences with the mimics. And, in this case, for me, nothing that I, it didn't go any further than what I essentially is consent to, and as soon as I
Hmm.
said no, it was done. No means no,
Hmm.
apparently in the non-human world as well. So that was it. And it didn't hurt, but and when you dream, for me anyway, I know that there's something more than just a quote unquote dream when I can have a sensation within the dream.
Hmm.
And then I
Hmm.
remember it very clearly the next day when I wake up and then moving forward. Other dream, the qualities of other dreams, maybe just, my brain processing whatever through the day, or,
Yeah, the transdimensional experiences are much different than a regular dream. And,
right.
people, I've tried explaining that to people, but I think they need to experience it in order to see how significantly different it is.
Sure.
And so that's very, very interesting. So, and common. We tend to associate those health checks with ETs, but again, that's being filtered through our own perceptual arena. We're giving that identity, we're giving those names, we're giving those descriptions. And as
Right.
I said earlier, I think there's way more overlap than we ever could imagine. And then the other part of this, I have two friends in England, Philip and Ronald Kinsella. They've both been abducted by the Grace, and they're quite convinced that it may have been, oh, how do I describe this? Less physical and more etheric, because they could go through walls, and but that it seems to be a direct copy of the physical, that they can, find out what's going on with our health and different, what we would consider violations. They think they're helping. It's
You're
funny.
right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And
You
from what I
know?
understand, they can, remove you from the body and create some of that separation.
Yeah.
So they have obviously far more ability than we have here, and than we are meant to really have here, from my belief, that this three-dimensional reality is very dense, and it has certain parameters for a specific purpose, for specific
Yeah,
experiences that we came here to have. So
I agree. I agree. I just want to give a shout out to Play Love Remember. Welcome to the show. Lovely to have you in the chat. Um, I'm wondering now if we could just shift over to anything you didn't cover that you wanted to cover. If you have a message for the audience, please tell everybody about what you're up to. Tell them about the Weird Walk Home, your channel, what you guys are up to, anything, and where people can reach you. I think that's really important too.
Yeah, definitely. So there is a story that I think could be entertaining for people that will segue right into what we're doing right now with the channel and perhaps our endeavor. I hesitate to say mission or purpose because those come with a lot of, ego loaded
Yeah.
feelings that I don't want to, imbue or communicate. So I'll give this story and then we'll segue into that. So another twilight sleep sort of experience, or perhaps even in an actual dream, not sure which. But in this particular dream, let's just say it, I was walking along street side where there's a bunch of, little boutique shops that open up to the street. And I look over, I see this shop where it's, if anybody's ever seen the movie Gremlins, where where the main character gets Gizmo, it's in this dimly lit, you know, curious little, lots of mystical looking things, mysterious little shop, and this little Asian man doddering around attending to all the things in there. So, and that's essentially what the shop looked like. Very curious, lots of little trinkets everywhere, and this little Asian man in the shop at the back. So I walk in and he sees me, and there's people milling around, but he sees me immediately and he says, "Oh, what you need is down there." And I don't think anything of it in the dream state. I'm typically a very egoless, just there for the experience sort of um, state of mind, which is actually very relieving and kind of nice. So he tells me, "Oh, it's over there," and I, look over, and I don't see what he's gesturing towards. He says, "No, no, no, behind there." And behind what is a false wall, essentially, is a staircase that goes down, 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 down. And this is in esoteric terms or even in psychotherapy terms, this is symbolic of, going, deep down into your own, psyche, into your own inner self. So I go down these steps, and at the base of the steps, it opens up into this massive theater. And on the screen, they're filming something that has to do with Egyptian gods, goddesses, priests, priestesses, moving about, talking on the screen. And so I sit down at the back of the theater just to observe what's going on. And, on the screen comes one of the gods who has the crocodile head, which I don't know too much about Egyptian mythology, especially about that particular god. And as this god is on screen talking to the priests and priestesses, it turns to look at the audience and actually to look at me at the back of the theater and proceeds to come through the screen and walk down the aisle to come back towards me. And as he's coming down the aisle, so the screen is huge, but as he's coming down the aisle, he kind of shrinks down to what would be nearly human size. He's still a little bit bigger and gets all the way back to me and begins to speak. And I can remember this very clearly. The way that he looked was what I would call hyper real. So
Mhm.
high definition, more depth and richness of color and features than we have in our day-to-day life. If anybody's ever seen the movie What Dreams May Come, like that kind
Mhm.
of just vivid, amazing detail. And I could see the color, the greens, the bumps on the skin, but it was perfect though. Dare I say handsome? This individual was handsome for a crocodile, which just I feel strange saying that, but that's what comes to mind. And wearing the full pharaoh sarcophagus head regalia, full robes down to the floor, and begins to talk to me. And the lips are actually, the skin around the lips or the teeth is moving, but like a badly dubbed movie. Like it's not quite like our mouth, but still kind of trying to mimic uh, the the actions of speaking, and the tongue is moving a little bit, articulating. And he's talking to me, relaying a message that's actually for Tilly, interestingly enough. So he's telling me, tell Tilly that, she's done a great job thus far. Everything's going to be okay. She's going to figure it out. There will be a new direction that she can take where she'll be able to do what it is that she came here to try to help with. So I am taking this message and, like it's nothing. It was a casual conversation, very, you know, without threat, without any, I mean, like it was just another person on the street, very calm, which was kind of nice, pleasant
Mhm.
actually. So I wake up and I tell Tilly, I give her this message, and she said, I haven't said anything to you yet, but I've been working on my channel, and I've with these messages that I've been trying to give to people consistently. She was being met with threats, sexual harassment. There were a
Mhm.
lot. There was much negativity that she was being given, just trying to share these messages that were aimed at just helping people get out of what they said they wanted to within their lives, that whatever mess they had created, whatever suffering they were in. She was, asked to help. She would give the information, and then it would just go all south from there. So she was feeling really discouraged and like she wanted to just, quit, didn't really know what to do at that point. And she said, I had been thinking about asking you to kind of take over the channel because you know how to talk to people in and around and through those egos so that you don't upset them when you tell them something that they need to do to better themselves when they asked for that information, essentially. So, and that,
Mhm.
growing up in a home where, you were always stepping on eggshells because the parents were emotionally immature. And I love my parents. I don't hold it against them. There's no negativity there. It's just, it is what it is. So she um, had been having these thoughts, and this message that I gave to her was essentially the bridge to say, me, have reached a point where, at least in my dreams, only in your dreams, at least in my dreams, that I am able to, manage these things and perhaps can make a good partner in being able to relay this kind of help to people and make paranormal experience. This is a terrible reference, but it came to mind. I'm sorry for the political reference. Make paranormal experiences great again.
Yeah,
I,
no, no, it's
I mean
okay.
not, I mean nothing by that politically. It's
No,
just
it's not
something
a
that,
problem, not a
yeah, it
problem.
just it,
I think it's kind of funny.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. So anyway, so that's kind of where I started doing the Intermediary Diaries on
mhm,
our YouTube channel, which she started. So the YouTube channel is called The Weird Walk Home. And we have not uploaded a video in a couple of weeks because I've had a wicked injury that I've been dealing with. But
mhm.
um, every week I have been putting out, with her assistance, her editing, videos about basically diarying. That's a terribly awkward word. um
Journaling,
Thank you. Yeah, my brain's not
journaling.
working anymore. But
No, it's all
journaling,
good.
yeah, journaling my experience with each of these individual paranormal experiences that have gradually opened me up and changed my perspective about human psychology versus the non-human psychology, and how we can improve our own relationships by incorporating some of the lessons from non-human psychology, and maybe even people from right here on our planet, the neurodivergent community, basically, who operate more on that level. So, and more
Mhm,
inviting that sort of integration and cooperation and peace, basically, we say that we want so very much. So I do that on the channel to, piece by piece, story by story, give context for people to be able to do that. And then, I'm not sure if you mentioned it in this introduction or if it was in the first introduction before we went live, but we will be going as honored guests to the Full Disclosure Now conference in St. Pete Beach in Florida, which is, I believe, the second week in July. I'm not sure the exact dates, but you can find it on the internet pretty easily. So, and then on Facebook,
fantastic.
Tilly still has her profile that you can reach out. It is Tilly Treadwell. And then for any more, if anybody's interested in reading about quantum time slips and experiences, Tilly actually wrote a few pieces in this book called Weird Time. It was put out by Sean Castile and Tim Schwartz. You can find it on Amazon. If anybody wants to read more about that. I am not as accomplished an author as Tilly just yet, maybe someday, but she will be working on more books that, we'll have announcements about on the channel as they come.
Wonderful, wonderful. And so the name of your channel is The Weird Walk Home.
Correct, on YouTube, yes.
On YouTube, wonderful. Yeah, and the links will be below, everybody. So, wow, that's a lot. We covered a lot of information today. I really appreciate you coming on the show. I'm hoping to have you back one day, and when if and when Tilly wants to come on, she'd be welcome to come on the show as well. I want to thank all the people in the live chat. Very kind of you to show up and to support us. And I also want to say thank you to those that are listening on an audio podcast and those that are watching the replay. Sorry, my mind has just started going. But yeah, so thank you, everybody, like I said, for joining us. And I hope everybody has a wonderful upcoming week. You can join me on Wednesdays for the Quantum Guide Show. Love to have you all there. And with that, I guess we will say goodbye and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me for the Aliens and Angels podcast. Read about my true life ET contact in my book called Transdimensional Meet the New Neighbors, which is now available on Amazon worldwide. Subscribe to my YouTube, Rumble, and X channels at Karen Holton TV. The like button and leave me a comment. And please do share this podcast with your friends. Check out my website at www.karenholtonhealthcoach.com to see my free resources and amazing products and services. All of the links will be in the description below. As part of the Forbidden Knowledge Network, you'll also find the Quantum Guide Show with Karen Holton on all audio platforms. Until next time, keep up the good work.